Gwen Nicholson is a good mother. She would do anything for her daughter's happiness. However, there are moments when Gwen worries that she's spoiling the child. One of the moments when a mother is questioning her parenting. Today happens to be one of those moments for Gwen, where buying Amelia a pony was a terrible idea and is now facing the unexpected consequences of her reckless decisions. This difficult and stupid beast that would rather be outside in the thunderstorm instead of seeking shelter within the barn. The thunderstorm was making the pony jittery, difficult to reason. What other reason why the damn beast would put such a fight to get inside the barn? Better question, why did she agree to buy her daughter this damn horse on a whim? Surely you would have thought that the creature would see a barn as an inviting prospect, a place that would provide warmth and shelter from the harsh weather. But Gwen so determined, so desperate to get this damn creature inside the barn by striking the terrified pony. Gwen had just hoped that Amelia didn't see her mother taking her frustrations out on the animal. Once inside the barn, the horse was losing its fight. The ignorant creature was now submissive, but reluctant, agitated, still panicking. Gently, Gwen patted the horse, out of regret for her temper, letting something like this getting the better of her. A woman who occasionally questions her decisions as both a mother and a wife, even though it was that time of the month. She just can't let things like this get the better of her. Gwen knew she was better than this. The painful churning in her body, these damn periods like clockwork, but coming a day early. If Gwen only saw the horror that was hiding within the barn, how death hung over Gwen as she tried enduring the inner pains. But there was a reluctance to see this female's blood being spilt onto the floor. A blood cycle that spared her from a demon's appetite for carnal pleasure and flesh. Instead of the urges of indulging the flesh of woman, there was nothing but disgust within Rawhead. The immense drive, its mighty phallic was shriveled at such filth. She had the blood cycle about her. Rawhead could sense the soiled filth between her legs. It could taste its copper tang, how it sickened him. For tonight, Rawhead will not touch this woman. When the pains got worse, Gwen immediately rushed out of the barn to clean herself from the filth seeping between her legs. But Rawhead wasn't one to deny itself from any fresh meat that came his way, began moving towards the frightened horse. At first sight, the horse looked mighty to Rawhead, like the animals during his time, but this creature reeked with fear. The sharp yelp from Rawhead's mouth tearing into its flesh only aroused the demon. Rawhead wanted to indulge in the creature's horror of having its body torn apart, to enjoy as much suffering as it can get from this pitiful horse before its miserable life fades away. Like a king, Rawhead sat on his fleshy throne, pondering of the beautiful carnage that's yet to come. Not much of a thinker, but a demon that was overwhelmed with an ungodly appetite. For Rawhead knew of the carnage that will follow, for this was his wilderness. Ready to throw the pretenders off from his land, cremate them within their houses, slaughter their children and wear the bowels of their infants as necklaces. They will never subdue him again, for Rawhead felt that tingling excitement of what's yet to come. It should come as no surprise that a spoiled child would investigate the high-pitched squeals coming from the barn, especially after witnessing her mother striking the horse out of anger. Amelia was never one on listening to her parents' authority, a child that rarely sees any discipline for her disobedience, and yet may have spared her from the terrible consequences. Little Amelia, crippled from witnessing a traumatic horror as a result of her meddling. If she were to only listen to her mother's demands of staying inside from the rain, then maybe her fearless or foolish father, Denny, wouldn't have braved himself into that barn to fend off whatever trespasser that would dare set foot on his land. You know, there's a ritual to this. A man who must defend his household. A king who must protect his family and land with rifle in hand. In Denny's mind, there's not a threat on this world that wouldn't sweat at the sight of his loaded rifle. Denny, our king being oblivious to Gwen's screaming demands for him to call the ambulance while tending to their distraught child. A brave, stupid man who must do the foolish act of reclaiming what is rightfully his, fully committed to the idea that his efforts would drive off whatever it is that wandered onto his land and would dare seek shelter in his barn. You can imagine how that ignorant confidence would face an unexpected challenge when entering the barn. Denny's body immediately wanting to heave out when seeing the pony's insides beneath his shoes. Blood and organs scattered everywhere. What sick fuck would do something like this? Regardless of the tightening clench in his body when knowing the severity of the situation, Denny was still determined to face off against this threat, his loaded rifle ready to strike down whoever would dare violate his land, demanding for the sick bastard to show himself. And when Denny saw the trespasser stand up from the darkened corner of the barn, that moment when Denny regretted his actions, when seeing all 9 feet of it, looking down at him, this stupid Mel that reeked with fear, trying to convince himself that a cannon stick would stop a king from reclaiming its land, and watching the mite running out of the barn like the prey that he truly is, Rawhead had made a vow against these pretenders who plundered his land. The gunshot wound had only aroused the demon, driving it into a murderous frenzy. There was an erection when hearing the pretender's wet bones break as Rawhead continued slamming the body onto the ground over and over and over. But when Rawhead's sadistic performance was interrupted by the screams of the filthy woman from a distance, watching from behind a window of her home. Is that a child? Yes, Rawhead could smell the child. It's been so long since Rawhead tasted child meat. Rawhead wanted child meat, like a wild animal just waiting to tear into a slab of exquisite flesh, his teeth already bloodied and ready for more. Rawhead teasing himself when smearing its hideous face on the window, excited for what's yet to come. Not even a woman's blood cycle will stop Rawhead from spoiling himself. Pushing himself through the window, Rawhead ignored the glass shards cutting into his flesh, for the pain and blood had only given the creature more excitement. The child's scent was now stronger. Rawhead could smell the child's fear upstairs. This little lamb kept safe within the mother's protection. But for how long? The filthy mother only knows of the appetite, but not the very thing that is keeping her alive. Upstairs, in her bedroom, her mind trying to respond with the creature's silence downstairs. That maybe it didn't see them, that there's no more prey in this house, that it got scared and ran away when seeing the flashing lights of the police car when Gwen called the authorities while witnessing her husband's head smashed open. A mother who began praying that it was just a dream. Yes, a menstrual nightmare. That it's all a dream. She's just dreaming it. It's okay, Amelia. It's just a bad dream. A dream with Rawhead outside the bedroom window, watching the little child trying to sleep off this terrible nightmare. This delicious child flesh. And when Gwen grabbed Amelia quietly, trying to move back downstairs, it was when Gwen heard the glass shattering in the bedroom. That was when Amelia's foot got caught on something. The final moments of Gwen's life before losing balance and falling down the stairs was seeing the monster holding her child like a doll, its bloody mouth of several teeth tearing off the upper half of Amelia. And before Gwen could let out a scream, maybe shed a tear to the traumatizing horror she just witnessed, everything went dark when Gwen hit her head on the banister, causing her neck to break. It was 12 or 13 years ago when Sergeant Gissing first responded to a murder. A young couple who had an unhealthy relationship that ended tragically. The boyfriend, who just found out that his lover was having an affair, lost his temper in a drunken fit and ended up killing the poor girl. Sergeant Gissing had been on the force for about 30 years, and that was the only shocking crime within the town of Zale. Until now. You can imagine the horror on Gissing's face when he got to the Nicholson farm, and when Thomas Garrow's body was found, or what was left of him before the birds and worms got to him. This was not a drunken squabble, nor the act of a dysfunctional relationship. This was something different. The beginning of a horror for this quiet, peaceful little town. The child. God, what horror would do something like this? This was the workings of a sick and depraved murderer. And Sergeant Gissing knew that the forthcoming days are not going to be easy. There will be more bodies within this town that thrives on tourists and sightseers. A killer is on the loose, and Sergeant Gissing just hopes that Seal is ready for what is yet to come. And Sergeant Gissing being driven back to town, his mind trying to ease from the horrors with these forbidden fantasies that he can never bring himself into admitting to. From a distance, Rawhead could sense the perverted thoughts of the dreams of an aged man, the young nymphs easing Gissing's touch with reality. Rawhead was unfamiliar with these beasts that was carrying these filthy mites. Maybe the reasons why the horses were so pitiful and weak when these barbarians have found new creatures to ride upon. Sooner or later, Rawhead knew that he was going to confront this strange beast that proved to be more dominant than the steeds, and Rawhead, swallowing its fear, prepared itself for confrontation of this beast. But Rawhead's expectations for battle to understand its enemy had only resulted with confusion when seeing the metal box fleeing out of fear and killing itself immediately when hitting the tree, giving the creature's death a few cautionary moments before smelling the blood in the air, and seeing the creature's blood spilling onto the ground. But not just the blood of the metal beast, but the blood of a mite that was steering the creature. Rawhead advancing itself to the destroyed box. It could see that someone was alive within. The pretender wasn't dead. Sergeant Gissing did not struggle when the demon grabbed him by the foot. Rawhead held him up like he was examining a strange species. Our hardened cop touching new layers of fear when gazing upon Rawhead with fear and awe. This barbarian, the same barbarian that had driven Rawhead underground. They took his land. Rawhead fascinated by the thing between the mite's twitching legs. This pretender's manhood, not large, but shrunken, out of fear. Why would this pretender neglect its manhood? Rawhead sensed its perverted need in the air. Have these pretenders weakened with time? Useless. Rawhead grabbing the mite's manhood, ripping it from Gissing's body. Rawhead would have killed the pitiful mite, but somewhere down the line, these pitiful barbarians have already faced something worse than death. They denied their manhood, and as Gissing's shrieking howls were followed by the explosion of the metal beast, Rawhead watched as the strange blood erupted into a fire. Not that Rawhead feared the fire, but respected it. With the chorus of the shrieking pretender, Rawhead studied the fire and learned of a new and lethal way to cremate his enemies. For this land will be his again. The bride. The minister's daughter had just gotten married. After the wedding ceremony, there was a great feast, with music and dancing and contests and games, even old children's games. When they got to play hide-and-seek, the bride decided to hide in her grandfather's trunk up in the attic. They'll never find me there, she thought. As she was climbing into the trunk, the lid came down and cracked her on the head, and she fell unconscious inside. The lid slammed shut and locked. No one will ever know how long she called for help, or how hard she struggled to free herself from that tomb. Everyone in the village searched for her, and they looked almost everywhere. But no one thought of looking in the trunk. After a week, her brand new bridegroom and all the others gave her up for lost. Years later, a maid went up to the attic looking for something she needed. Maybe it's in the trunk, she thought. She opened it and screamed. There lay the missing bride in her wedding dress. but by then she was already a skeleton.